All right, class. I'm going over the concepts of chapter one with you. So, hopefully, you're seeing this screen here. It deals in chapter one. They want us to know basically the levels of life, where it starts at. Life typically starts at the cell level. Anything that has the ability to replicate is considered living. So, here on the far top left, prior to life, you have maybe like some atoms interacting. They form molecules. And then somewhere along, you get to a cell, and inside your cells, just like we have in our body, organs that perform certain functions, you have organs and cells called organelles. So, looking at the top, there's a organelle called the mitochondria, which makes a molecule called ATP, which all cells need to make in order to survive, to do work. The next level, once you get all the organelles, you have the cell. In this case, there's different types of cell. For example, here in the picture, they give us a picture of a smooth muscle cell. When you have two or more cells working together, you form what's called a tissue. And basically, in our body, there's four major tissue types. Let's see, there's connective tissue, nervous tissue, epithelial tissue, and muscle, if I haven't already said it. Well, when you have two or more tissues working together, like in the next scenario down here, you formed an organ. And in this case, this organ, you're looking at a blood vessel. And you'll look inside the blood vessel, you'll notice one type of tissue making the inner lining of the cavity within the vessel, which we call a lumen, a cavity. This type tissue in the lumen is called epithelial tissue. And then within the walls is smooth muscle, which is a different tissue. And then surrounding the smooth muscle, you have connective tissue. So these are three, actually three. You just need two or more. And if they're working together to perform a function, you form what's called an organ. Next, if you have multiple organs working together to perform a specific function, then that's called a organ system. And in our example here, they're showing us the cardiovascular system, which includes the organs like the heart, and then other organs like arteries and your veins. You have more than one system type, for example, nervous system, digestive system. You put all the systems together and you form what's called the organism. All right, let's move on. Now, you cannot have one system particularly go down and still maintain life. All the systems have to be working, and they work together to sustain life. And basically, this picture is giving you that scenario here where the outer border is representing your skin, which is called the integumentary system, helps protect you against things that may cause harm inside the body. It has other functions as well. Then you have like your digestive system, which is the function to break down foods, to absorb nutrients, which you will deliver through the cardiovascular system. And then oxygen, you need oxygen to survive in order to make that molecule called ATP. That'll be delivered as well through the cardiovascular system to tissues. And then waste products are being picked up from those tissues, like carbon dioxide, and they're delivered to organs. In this case, like let's say carbon dioxide needs to go to your respiratory system so that you can exhale it out. There are other waste products that you'll break down through chemical reactions and like nitrate waste that you're going to excrete out of the body through the urinary system. But anyway, this picture is showing you that all the systems work together to maintain life. One of the things they want us to know in this chapter are the different systems of the body, what organs that belong in each system, and then what are the functions of each system. So let's just take one at a time. Let's look at your integumentary system, which the organs include the skin, which is the largest organ of the body, your hair, another organ, and your nails. So one of the major things it does is keep things out that may cause harm in the body. So it serves like a barrier for protection and anything that may cause disease. Also keeps the insides moist since we live in a dry environment. You do have what we call receptors, which is nervous tissue in your skin to give you an awareness of what's going on outside your body, like when you're hot, you're cold, when you've been touched, or when you feel pain. So these receptors in your skin help monitor what's going on outside the body that may have an effect on your body. The other thing you have within your skin are glands, like sweat glands that you'll produce sweat in order to maintain body temperature. You also will secrete oils. You have oil glands in the skin, and the oils will help lubricate the skin, which we live in a dry environment. And also, what did I say? Lubricate, moisturize, that's one thing. And gives it a kind of waterproof mechanism to your skin as well. Oh, one last thing. Vitamin D. Yes, we need vitamin D in order to absorb calcium, and you can get vitamin D from your diet. But your skin, when it absorbs UV rays, it starts making the pre-molecule vitamin D, which then your kidneys will convert into the final product. So yeah, you can make a little bit of vitamin D as well. And another thing here, you'll notice that when you're exposed to sun rays or UV rays, you'll start to look darker. You have cells in the skin called melanocytes, which make the pigment called melanin, and that's to absorb UV rays so that you can protect yourself against the UV rays. Too much exposure can cause damage to your cells. So those are the functions of your integumentary system. Your skeletal system, basically it's the bones in the body. Yes, it does give you structure. I understand that. But I'm looking for things like protection. So if you look at your rib cage, it protects the organs within it. Your skull, the cranial cavity, protects the brain. And then your vertebrae, what's within it is your spinal cord, it provides it protection. So that's one function of your skeletal system. Another function is that it provides the attachment sites for skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is that muscle that you use for movement and voluntarily communication. So it's the only type muscle that you can consciously control. So again, another function is it allows attachment sites for skeletal muscle. And another function, if you look within your bones, you have bone marrow where blood cells are produced. And the blood cell types that are produced will be red blood cells, which their job is to carry oxygen to your tissues. White blood cells are also produced in bone marrow. Their job is to look for things that are foreign to get rid of if it's in the body. And fragments of stem cells called platelets, and to help form a blood clot should you have a slight tear in a blood vessel. Another function of your skeletal system, it provides a storage site when you can store and reserve calcium in your bones as well as phosphate. And then let's say calcium levels in the bloodstream fall below normal, you can pull from the bone that calcium into your bloodstream. So let's go. Protection is one of the functions. Mineral storage as well. We said it also provides the attachment sites for skeletal muscles. And within the bone marrow is blood cell production. Okay, your muscular system. Well, there are three types of muscles in the body. The one that you're looking here in the picture is called skeletal muscle. That is the only muscle that you're consciously aware of controlling. So the functions could be for communication, movement. In times when you're cold, your skeletal muscles will automatically contract quickly in order to produce heat to maintain body temperature. So those are the functions of your skeletal muscle. The other muscles that are not shown here, another type could be smooth muscle. Most often, you're going to find smooth muscle within the walls of organs where you're pushing a solid or a liquid. So an example, your digestive organs, you'd have smooth muscle within those organs pushing solids versus, let's say, the bladder. Within that organ, you have smooth muscle pushing a liquid waste. Not always, but most often that's where you find smooth muscle within the walls of organs pushing a solid or a liquid. The other type of muscle we'll see in a little bit is cardiac muscle, which is the heart, which is part of your cardiovascular system. And the function of the heart is to push blood. Okay, your nervous system. Organs that belong in the nervous system are your brain. What connects to the brainstem is the spinal cord. It's also part of this system. And coming off the spinal cord are nerves. So the function of your nervous system is to be able to monitor anything that has an effect on the body that may be changing, and then to respond to that change to maintain a balance. So things that you want to maintain that you don't want deviating too far right, too far left would be like body temperature. It has to be at a certain level to be alive. Sugar levels in the bloodstream, mineral levels, hormone levels in the bloodstream. These are all things you constantly have to maintain. Blood pressure, blood pH. So the main function, if I had to put it real easy in one word, is to control homeostasis. Homeostasis, that word in chapter 1, is the constant maintenance of your inside conditions. In other words, your internal environment. Examples, body temperature, blood pH, mineral levels, sugar levels, etc. So you're constantly maintaining these conditions, and should it slightly deviate, your nervous system has to be able to respond and react to maintain that. So let's give an example. Let's say if you're overheating, you want to maintain body temperature. So in order to not overheat too much, you would produce sweat. And as the sweat evaporates from your skin, it takes heat from the body. Another example to, let's say, cool off. If I want to, let's say, cool down, I should say, warm blood, I would send more warm blood to my blood vessels in the skin, and through conduction, in other words, just simply touching items, I could lose heat from my body. An example, if you ever sat in a chair for a period of time, after a while, when you get up, you'll notice the chair is warm. You lost some of your heat to your environment. So that's another way you can cool down, by shifting blood toward the surface of your skin. Vice versa, if I'm cold, I want to shift blood toward my inner core to protect the organs. Okay, let's go back again to the main function here. The function of our nervous system, again, is to maintain what's called homeostasis, which means the constant maintenance of your internal environment. And we gave examples like body temperature, even though changes are occurring outside as well as inside the body. Your endocrine system. Your endocrine system include all these different organs, and they make what's called hormones. Hormones are chemicals that, when produced, they travel in your, well, mainly your bloodstream. And when they get to a specific target, they're going to be involved in some form of homeostasis. Okay, so let's give an example. Let's say your pancreas here. So let's say you eat a meal. After eating a meal, your nutrients, one of the nutrients may be sugar. Let's say your sugar levels go up. You want your cells to take that sugar in order to make that molecule called ATP to survive. So after you eat a meal, sugar levels go up. Your pancreas will respond by making a hormone called insulin. And that insulin will tell your cells to uptake the sugar to make ATP. Let's say, again, let's go the opposite scenario. You're fasting, right? Well, When you're fasting, the first thing you're going to use for energy is called glycogen. Glycogen is the storage form of sugar stored in mainly your liver. So when you're fasting, the first thing you're going to do, the pancreas will make a different hormone called glucagon, and that will start to break down the glycogen in the liver and release it as sugar. Okay. Once you break down all your glycogen levels, let's say the next thing you would break down would be adipose tissue. Then if you use all the reserves of adipose tissue, your fat, in other words, the next thing your body will break down are your own proteins. So you may see someone's frame get smaller. So that's one example where these hormones are involved in maintaining, again, homeostasis. All right, let's give another example. So let's give an example of your thyroid gland, which is in the neck region. One of the hormones there produced, you can call it thyroid hormone for right now. And that hormone's job is to increase your metabolism. Okay, what does metabolism mean? Metabolism is the reactions that occur in the body. You may be building something up, breaking something down, or swapping the reactants involved in a reaction. So your thyroid gland will make a hormone called thyroid hormone that increases your metabolism. And you may notice as we get older, you don't make as much of that hormone, your metabolism levels will drop. All right, without going over each of these glands and their hormones, which they make, that's part of 2402. What we need to get out of this is that this system called the endocrine system, the organs here will make hormones that travel in your body or bloodstream, and they're involved in maintaining some form of homeostasis. I want to bring to your attention, you'll notice the ovaries and testes are in this system as well. So an example, let's say for hormones, the male will make testosterone, and the counterpart from the ovaries and the female will make estrogen and progesterone. Some of these organs you may find in another system. So your ovaries and testes don't just belong in the endocrine system, they also belong in the reproductive system, because that's where, for the male, where sperm is produced, and the ovaries, the females, where the egg is produced. So again, some organs you may find in more than one system. Another organ here, let me just point this out. Your pancreas also belongs to the digestive system. The pancreas can also make digestive enzymes that can be delivered to the small intestine. So yes, the pancreas not only belongs here in the endocrine system, but also be part of the digestive system. Okay, your cardiovascular system. Cardio is referring to heart, vascular referring to the blood vessels, in this case, arteries and veins. The main function, just think of it's a transport mechanism. The heart is the one pushing the blood that's transporting the things in blood to where they're needed. So what is it that's being transported? Well, think of like gases, like oxygen and carbon dioxide. You need to deliver oxygen to your tissues to make ATP. You also need to deliver nutrients to your tissues to make ATP. And then when they do make ATP, one of the waste products is produced called carbon dioxide. So that also has to be transported to the lungs so that you can exhale out and also bring in oxygen. Other things that are being transported in the bloodstream are hormones, minerals, electrolytes, and I believe I already mentioned nutrients. So that has the function of your cardiovascular system. All right, next system is called the lymphatic / immune system. Well, your blood vessels, if I can go back to one of the pictures in the very beginning here, your blood vessels are semi-permeable, which means certain things may be leaked out, fluids mainly. And these fluids, as they leak out, is called interstitial fluid. That's the fluid between your blood vessels and tissue that's been leaked out of your bloodstream. And that fluid basically provides a bridge so that oxygen nutrients can go toward your tissues And then the waste products made by the tissues can also be picked up and enter the bloodstream to be delivered to certain systems to be excreted out of the body. Well, that fluid called interstitial fluid can't just keep building up. Otherwise, you would see a lot of swelling in your limbs. So that fluid has to be put back into your bloodstream a certain way. And one of the ways is through your lymphatic / immune system. So you see here in green, you have what's called lymph nodes. And as fluid builds up, this fluid's going to push into your lymph nodes. And through your body movements, that fluid's going to be pushed up high, 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 and eventually enter a vein up high between the neck and shoulder region in your subclavian vein. Okay, so one of the jobs here in the lymphatic system is one, to recycle interstitial fluid, that fluid that leaked out of your bloodstream. Another function is, we said white blood cells are produced in bone marrow, right? So you see to the top left of the picture, bone marrow. So you'll notice your skeletal system, the bone marrow part also belongs in the lymphatic system because that's where white blood cells are produced. And once white blood cells are produced, they enter your bloodstream, and then they can get out of your bloodstream and enter tissues like your lymphatic system. So think of white blood cells inside your lymph nodes. Their job is to look for things that are foreign, that don't belong. So they filter your fluid before putting the fluid back into your bloodstream. And that interstitial fluid, once it enters your lymphatic stream, it's actually called lymph fluid. And the white blood cells are hopefully catching anything foreign, getting rid of it before the fluid goes back into your bloodstream. Another organ here is the thymus. Now, I didn't mention it, but in the endocrine system, you have the thymus, and endocrine system, remember, these organs make hormones. So your thymus does make hormones to train certain white blood cells. Okay, so if it makes hormones, it's part of the endocrine system. But notice we also find it in the lymphatic / immune system. Immunity means resistance to disease. And what's looking for things that are foreign to get rid of so that no disease occurs are white blood cells. Now, because your thymus is training certain white blood cells, it's also part of what's called the lymphatic / immune system. And that's why you find it here. Your spleen is part of the lymphatic / immune system because one of its jobs is to allow white blood cells to proliferate here. Well, proliferate, what does that mean? Proliferate basically means to replicate and increase in number. Okay, another function in your spleen is to break down old red blood cells. Okay, so those are functions of our lymphatic / immune system. Your respiratory system, some of the organs that you're going to see here, you could see your nasal cavity. As you inspire air, you're warming it up, you're humidifying it and filtering it. Your pharynx region is right behind your oral cavity. Your larynx, inside the larynx, you have your vocal cords, so that's where gases will go next, down your windpipe called the trachea. That's the proper term, trachea, not windpipe. And then it branches out into what's called bronchi for plural or bronchus for singular. And eventually, what's not shown here, you'll see little round sacs where gas exchange occurs. And that is the major function of your respiratory system, is gas exchange. You need to take oxygen in the body from your atmosphere, and you need to exhale out that waste product, carbon dioxide, that was produced by your tissues when they made ATP, so that way they could survive. Notice right below the lungs, there's an organ here called the diaphragm, which is actual muscle. It is skeletal muscle. It helps you to inspire so that gases can come into the body. Again, the function of the respiratory system, real simple, gas exchange. Taking in oxygen, getting rid of carbon dioxide. Your digestive system, the function is digestion. Well, what is the definition of digestion? Digestion means you're taking a nutrient and you're breaking it down into its most simplest form. So that way you can absorb it into your bloodstream and deliver it to your tissues to make ATP. And remember, that molecule ATP, all cells need to make that in order to survive. What do you need for making ATP? You need oxygen and you need a nutrient. The three basic nutrients types that you get from your diet are amino acids, which are the single units from breaking down proteins, sugars, simple sugars actually, which are the simple products from breaking down a large sugar, okay? And also fatty acids from breaking down a lipid. So your cells can take up nutrients like a sugar, an amino acid, or fatty acid and convert that to make ATP. Some of the organs here, and let me just trace the pathway as you would swallow food. You start in the oral cavity, you'll start digestion physically by chewing the contents, but also with the aid of enzymes that you may find in saliva. You swallow the contents, they go down through your esophagus. Contents will next enter your stomach. And then contents leave the stomach and they'll enter the small intestine where most absorption is going to occur. And then after the small intestine, things that weren't fully broken down or absorbed will enter your large intestine. And things that weren't fully broken down or absorbed will be excreted out of the body as feces through the anal canal. You also see your liver here. Well, your liver has a variety of functions, but in this case, it's involved in digestion by making a product called bile. Bile helps separate lipids into small units so that your enzymes can break it down. Let me give you an analogy, which is a comparison to something you know. If you had a cube of ice in your mouth versus crushed ice would melt faster in your mouth than a cube of ice because you spread out the surface of the ice. So similar, bile, what it does is gets between lipids and spreads it out so that your enzymes can break it down faster. And this bile produced by the liver is stored in a sac called the gallbladder, and then it can also eventually be delivered to your small intestine where most absorption of nutrients will occur. So again, function of the digestive system, breaking down nutrients into the most simplest form so that you can absorb it into your bloodstream and deliver it to tissues. Okay, your urinary system, the organs would include here your kidneys, which are connected to your bladder, and the connections to the bladder is called the ureter. And then liquid waste leaving the bladder would exit what's called the urethra. Some of the functions of the kidney. Well, one of them is to maintain blood volume in the body by retaining or getting rid of water. Okay, so if you're well hydrated, you can excrete water out, versus if you're dehydrated, you want to retain water. So if you can control blood volume, that means you can also control blood pressure. So one of the functions here, the kidneys maintains blood volume / blood pressure. Another function here is to get rid of any nitrogen waste products that may have formed through chemical reactions. Another function, which we'll get into the next chapter, I believe, chapter 2, it can control what's called blood pH. Okay, and we'll get more on that in chapter 2. So if you look here on the bottom of the reading, it says gets rid of nitrogen waste products, regulates the amount of water in the body. So that means you control blood volume, you can control blood pressure. It can also control blood pH by retaining certain electrolytes or getting rid of certain electrolytes. And you may ask, well, what's an electrolyte exactly? Well, when you look at a periodic table, the elements there derived from Latin. Basically, when we look at those, anything with a charge, whether it has a positive or a negative charge, you may refer to as a electrolyte. And we'll see that again when we get to chapter 2. Okay, your reproductive system for the male, some of the organs here will be the penis, the testes, the scrotum that contain the testes within it, prostate gland, ductus deferens. Okay, what's the function? Function, simple, is for reproduction. So here the testes inside will produce sperm. And that's why they belong in the reproductive system. Notice the testes, if we go back to the endocrine system, it was also part of that system because the testes also make hormones, testosterone. Okay. And then for the female, the counterpart of her organs, so instead of testes, you have here the ovaries where the egg is produced. Some other organs, the uterus, the vagina, the uterine, or you could say fallopian tubes, and mammary glands. And because we're in this system, the main function, again, is for reproduction. Don't forget the ovaries can also belong in the endocrine system because producing hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Now, these hormones, estrogen, progesterone, they help keep the reproductive organs of the female functional and also help to give feminization of the body. So that means like widening of the hips, of anticipation of birth, adipose deposit in different areas like mammary glands. And for the male, the counterpart, when the male produces testosterone, will keep the male's reproductive organs functional and also to help masculinize the body. All right, this picture here is just kind of giving us the concept of homeostasis. Homeostasis, recall, is the constant maintenance of your internal conditions that you don't want deviating too far right or too far left, otherwise you won't be alive. Things that you need to maintain: body temperature, blood pH, sugar levels, etc. So if something goes out of balance, you need receptors, which is nervous tissues. They'll sense when something's out of balance and they send information to the brain, and the brain's going to respond and communicate to targets to bring whatever went out of balance back into balance. So let's give a scenario. I think I've already given this scenario before. So let's say you're overheating, right? It's getting hot. Receptors, which are nervous tissue in your skin, tell the brain, hey, it's starting to get hot. So the brain is going to communicate to targets to cool down. So what are some targets you communicate to? One will be your sweat glands produce sweat. And as the sweat evaporates, you're going to cool down, hopefully back to normal body temperature. The other way you can cool down is by shifting blood and sending that warm blood to your skin so you can lose some of the heat to your environment. Now, there's two types of homeostasis that can occur. When the body does exactly the opposite to what it detected, that's called negative feedback. Anything the body detects is generally called a stimulus. So in this scenario on the top, the stimulus, what was detected is the heat, temperature is increasing. You detect that. It's a stimulus. And the body's response is to do the opposite in this case. So if you're overheating, you want to cool down. So when the body did the opposite to the stimulus, that's called negative feedback. Now, should the body help promote the stimulus, that would be called positive feedback. An example of positive feedback, let me see. Let's say you had a slight tear in a blood vessel. You don't want to keep bleeding. You want to seal that area off and form a blood clot. So when tissue there in the vessel lining is damaged, they will secrete chemicals to attract platelets, which will help form a blood clot. And you want more platelets to come to the area. Therefore, you're going to enforce the attraction of these platelets by releasing more chemicals to attract them. So here you're promoting the release of the chemicals to attract platelets to form a clot. And when you promote the stimulus, that's called positive feedback. Another example, let's say positive feedback. Let's say mom is ready to give birth. In times when mom's giving birth, the uterus will contract So when you need to push the baby out for birth, mom's going to make more contractions. She'll promote the contractions to increase. That will be another example of positive feedback, promoting the amount of contractions of the uterus. Now let's jump back to negative feedback. Negative feedback, again, is when the body does the opposite to the stimulus, opposite to what the body detects. Most often, most cases, the body, that's what it does. It does negative feedback. Very few examples of positive feedback versus negative. Let's take this bottom scenario. Let's say it's no longer hot, you're getting cold. Temperature, therefore, is decreasing. You do have receptors in the skin, nervous tissue, to send signals to the brain, and then the brain's going to communicate to targets to try to warm you up. One of the things it'll do is to communicate to skeletal muscles and cause the muscles to contract quickly. In other words, you'll start to shiver, and those muscles are attempting to produce heat because you're moving quickly. Hopefully that would be enough to get you back to normal body temperature. The other thing your body would do when you're cold is shift blood toward your inner core, protect the organs. Now, if you look at the example on the bottom, let's look at the stimulus. Temperature went down. The body's response was to try to bring temperature back up. It does the opposite. So this scenario, both on the top and bottom, are examples of what's called negative feedback. Okay, pretty much we've gone over the physiology, chapter 1. Physiology is how the body works. For lab will, again, members on Tuesday. You need to be on campus for that. In lab, you're learning anatomy. What's anatomy? You're learning the name of organs, name of muscles, bones. In this case, in this picture, you're learning what's called the anatomical landmarks of the body. Okay. Both the front and back. You're learning the anatomical position, which is basically the person is facing forward, the feet are shoulder width apart, the arms are to the side in what's called a supine position, where the palms are facing forward. We'll get to all this. You're learning body cavities as well, their names, also the organs that would belong in each body cavity. You're also learning the membranes that surround your organs, quadrants, regions, and definitions to these terms. So I'd like to start with the definitions of these terms, even though when you get in lab, Mr. Torres should go over this with you. I'll do this real brief and quick. So superior. Superior is usually referring to a point above another when found on the body. So let's take an example, your nose and your chin. Since your nose is above the chin, we would say the nose is superior. Because the chin is below the nose, well, then that we would refer to as inferior. Okay. So again, superior, usually referring to a point on the body above another. Inferior, the exact opposite, referring to a point below another point on the body. Cranial. Now, cranial doesn't necessarily mean superior. Cranial is usually referring specifically to an organism's head, the cranium. So cranial is usually referring to near the head. Caudal. Caudal is usually referring to the tail portion of an organism. Okay, ventral, anterior. These two terms mean the same thing. So anything in front of the body is referred to as anterior, or you could say ventral. Vice versa, if it's in the back of the body, you can refer to that as dorsal or posterior. So let's give an example. What did they use here? Your sternum, which is your breastbone, it's in front of the heart, so you could say it's more anterior compared to the heart, would be more posterior. Medial, well, if you were to cut an organism, let's say right down the midline, let's say down the midline of our nose, you produce an equal left and an equal right. So right down the midline of an organism is referred to as medial, or you say median. So like your nose is medial in the position where it's found in the body. If something is to the side of the body, not necessarily in the middle, if it's more to the side, we say it's lateral. So an example, my arm is compared to my nose is lateral. Now, let's say you have a point on the body. It's not too down the midline. It's not so far to the side. It's somewhere in between. Then that would be called intermediate. So an example, your clavicle, which is what? Your collarbone, but the correct term is clavicle. We would say it'd be intermediate in location to where it can be found on the body. Proximal, distal. You need a reference point. Always use the shoulder as your reference point. So anything near the shoulder region when compared to another point on the body is proximal. If it's further away from the shoulder, it's distal. So let's take an example. Your elbow and your wrist. Which one would be closest to the shoulder? Comparing these two would be the elbow. So the elbow is proximal. The wrist would be distal, which means further away. Now, let's just say I use two different other points. Let's say my wrist and my knee. If I compare those 2 points, now my wrist is closer to the shoulder. Then the wrist, you could say, is proximal, whereas the knee compared to the wrist would be more distal, further away. Superficial and deep. Superficial is referring to closer toward the extremity of the body or leaving the body. Deep referring to inside the body. So the examples I like to give is a wound. If I had to have a wound, I probably want it to be superficial, not somewhere where it's puncturing inside my body. That would be more of a deep wound. So those are the definitions to these directional terms. And again, you can use these PowerPoints to answer the lab worksheets that you're going to be seeing in the lab, instead of having to look for these answers in your e-text or your hard copy of the book. All right, let me look at these body cavities. Well, let's start right here in this picture here. So you're looking at a person in the drawing. They're in the anatomical position, which means the feet, they're shoulder width apart. The arms are to the side in a supine position, which means the palm of the hands are facing forward. Now, if I were to cut an organism, there's different ways you can cut it and you would produce different parts, okay? So when you cut in certain directions, which we say planes, you'll produce different body parts. So let's just take one of these planes. Let's say the transverse. Transverse means to go across. So if I did a transverse cut, I would produce a upper and a lower body part. And the proper way to say it, I would produce a superior and a inferior body part when doing a transverse cut. And looking at these images, which one has been used in a transverse plane would be letter B. You're looking at an image of the body that's been through a transverse plane, but you're looking at it from a superior view, from above. Okay, so that was the picture here. This is a transverse cut, and you're looking at the image from a superior view. Now, let me go to this picture here. This is called a frontal, or you say coronal cut. This is a type of cut that comes from above the head, and if you go down the body, would produce a front and a back. In other words, you produce in proper terms an anterior and a posterior body part. So this image, you're looking at a frontal section, or you could say coronal section of the body. We already saw the transverse one, right? Where the cut goes across the body. Now this one here, this one's called if it goes down the midline of the nose, in other words, down the midline of the body, you produce a left and a right image of the body. So that type of cut is called a median cut, or you could say medial. And if it's directly down the midline where you produce equal left and right part of the body, you can also refer to it as mid-sagittal. So this image you're looking at is of a mid-sagittal cut or view of the body. All right, let's look at the body cavities. The ones in yellow are more toward the back of the body. So in general, not specific, in general, you can refer to them as dorsal, which means in the back. The ones in this brownish red color, they're more toward the front of the body. And the term for those in general are ventral, which means in the front, ventral body cavities. Now, let's say I want to be more specific. So let's say we had an exam in lab. I'd want the specific answer. So for an example, what dorsal body cavity protects your brain? Well, it's called the cranial cavity. Yes, it's a dorsal cavity, but specifically protecting the brain, I would refer to it as a cranial cavity. What dorsal cavity protects your spinal cord? Well, it's called vertebral or vertebral cavity. Yes, again, it's a dorsal body cavity, but if I asked you specifically which dorsal body cavity protects your spinal cord, I would hope you know it as vertebral cavity. Now, in the chest, another name for chest is thoracic region. So all the cavities within the chest, yes, they are not just ventral, not just thoracic, right? But then you also have specific thoracic cavities that house different organs. So the thoracic cavity that protects or houses your heart, it's called pericardial cavity. The thoracic cavity that houses your lungs is called pleural cavity. And then the cavity that houses the blood vessels coming off the heart is called mediastinum cavity. The other cavity in the front that houses your digestive organs, it's called the abdominal cavity. And below that, the one that houses your reproductive, or you could say excretory organs, is called the pelvic cavity. Oftentimes, they can refer to both the abdominal and pelvic cavity as one. They can refer to it as abdominal pelvic cavity. Okay, so just in review, the ones in this brownish red, yes, they're all ventral body cavities, but when you're asked to identify it specifically with the organ found within that cavity, you try to be specific as possible. So an example, if I say, which ventral body cavity houses your heart, that would be called pericardial cavity. And this is a side view here of those cavities we just saw. This is the anterior or front view. Okay, your organs, when they're in the cavities, they're not just floating around easily, in the cavity on their own. They have membranes that surround them that hold them in place. It's one of their functions. They'll also allow for blood vessels, nerves to enter and exit the organ, and may provide as well lubrication. So these membranes around your organs, in general, they're called serous membranes. Serous is singular. If it's more than one, you refer to as serosa membranes. Serosa is plural, more than one. So this membrane, they try to compare it, let's say for your heart, imagine your fist in a balloon. The fist representing your heart. Part of the balloon would be touching your fist, and yet part of the balloon is not touching your fist. Similar to these membranes. Part of the membrane would be touching the organ, and then there's a part of the membrane that does not touch the organ, but that lines the cavity housing your organ. Okay? So the membrane itself around the heart, it's called pericardium. Notice it ends in UM. You want to be careful in the spelling because it's very similar to the name of the cavity housing your heart. Let's go back. What was the name of the heart? I'm sorry. What's the name of the cavity housing your heart? It's called pericardial. Well, that almost sounds like pericardium. So you got to be careful in the spelling. They mean two different things. If it ends in UM, it's the membrane surrounding the heart. Portions of the pericardium that touches the heart gets the word visceral. The part of the membrane that does not touch the heart but lines the cavity gets the word parietal. So visceral is more deeper in the body than the parietal part. Now, because this membrane backfolds, it forms a space in between called the pericardial space. Not necessarily the cavity, even though it has the same spelling, but it's the space here between the membrane. And in the space is fluid. The fluid is called serous fluid, and the function of that fluid is to provide lubrication. So that's just one membrane. When you're doing lab worksheet number 1 in the lab, you're going to be asked to identify different membranes around different organs. You're going to have to look in chapter 4 for those answers. Okay. So just remember, chapter 4 has those membranes listed for you. Or you can also have Mr. Torres, ask Mr. Torres to give the list of those membranes on worksheet, lab worksheet number 1. Okay, let's say you wanted a quick reference points on the body. You would do it easily by dividing it into quadrants. I try to tell the students, just remember, when you look at a picture, your right is the picture's left. So that means vice versa, your left is the picture's right. Okay. So you're going to notice you're going to have upper quadrants, one on the right, and then one on the left. And then you have lower quadrants, again, one on the right and one on the left. So that's just for a generic quick reference point on the body, use quadrants. Now, if you want to get more specific, we would use what's called regions. Let's see if I can focus on one picture here. Oh, they didn't label them here. Let me go back to, I guess this, we're going to have to use both, okay? So let's just start here in the middle. Epi means, that prefix epi means upon. Gastric, the organ that has gastric juices is your stomach. So this region here is called epigastric region. Right below the epigastric region was once where your umbilical cord was when you're developing as a fetus / embryo as well. So that makes sense. That's called your umbilical region. Below the umbilical region, it's well below your stomach. So that's called hypogastric region. That prefix hypo usually means less of or below. Notice you can also refer to hypogastric region as pubic region. All right, let's go back up high. Let's start on the right side of the picture. You have right hypochondriac region. Okay, hypo means below. Chondriac, what's chondriac mean? Well, let's look at the rib cage. Yes, you have your ribs and they're bones, but lining the ribs to your sternum, there's cartilage here called hyaline cartilage. And the cells that make the cartilage are called chondrocytes. So therefore, this region is right below those chondrocytes, right? So hypochondriac region. And then on the opposite side, on the left, you have a left hypochondriac region. Okay, lumbar region, usually you probably, if you already know, you probably think of lumbar region as the lower back extremities of the body. But technically, your lumbar region is anywhere from the end of your rib cage to your hip bone. So we can also apply it here. You have a right lumbar region and a left lumbar region. Let's go to the bottom extreme here. You have right iliac region and a left iliac region. Okay, where are we referencing this from? Well, on your hip bone, which is called your coxal bone, there's an area called the iliac crest, which is the top portion of your hip bone. Therefore, the region's called iliac region. You can also refer to it as inguinal region. So again, these are called regions, and they give a more accurate reference on the body if you want to get specific. All right, let's jump up here and go back. We have one more picture to look at. And again, this mainly applies to the lab. These are called anatomical regions. These are all listed on worksheet 1 where they want you to put in the anatomical regions for the areas of the body. I'll try to go over them just quickly and briefly. Starting with the forehead, that's referred to as frontal. The eye region is referred to as orbital. They didn't label it here, but your ear region is called otic, O-T-I-C. And the cheek region's buccal, or you say buccal. I believe it's B-U-C-C-A-L, even though it's not labeled here. Your nose region's nasal. Your mouth region's oral. Your chin is called mental. I like to think of the statue where he's mentally thinking to help me remember the chin. Then there's a statue where it looks like he's putting his fist on the chin and he's thinking mentally. So that helps me remember mental. Your neck region is called cervical. The whole region in the orange is your chest, can be called thoracic. Thoracic. And in the mid region is sternal, not sternum. If you put sternum, U-M, you mean the bone. We're not looking for the bone. We're looking for the superficial region called sternal. So it ends in A-L. Your armpit region is called axillary. Got to be careful on the spelling. Don't put auxiliary with a U. And then the area here is your mammary region. In purple is the abdominal region, and within there is your umbilical cord where it once was attached. So it's called umbilical region. Below the umbilical region in purple still, it's called pelvic region. Below the pelvic region, you have the inguinal region. And then down below, you have genitals, or you say pubic region. Let me jump back up to the arm. The shoulder is referred to as acromial. The upper arm is brachial. The elbow is antebrachial. Your forearm is, wait, did I say, let me go back. Antecubital, my bad. Your elbow is antecubital and your forearm is antebrachial. I need to slow down. Your wrist region is carpal. The whole hand is referred to as manus. The big thumb is pollex. Your fingers are referred to as digitals. The palm of the hand is palmar. Your hip region is coxal. The upper leg is femoral. Your knee region in the front is patellar. It has to have an R. If you put patella without the R, again, you're referring to the bone. The front part of the leg, the lower extremities, is crural. To the side is fibular, or you say peroneal. Again, you need that R there at the end of fibular. You put fibula, that means the bone. Your whole foot, think of riding a bicycle, you put your foot on a pedal, so the whole foot's referred to as pedal. The ankle is tarsal. The next region is metatarsal. And again, just like your fingers, your toes are referred to as digitals. And your big toe is the hallux. So these are the anatomical regions for the anterior part of the body. Just forgot to mention cephalic, we're referring to the head of the organism. Okay, the posterior view. So cephalic, again, the head, right? Now they labeled ear region. The ear is called otic, O-T-I-C. The back of the head region right here is called occipital. Your neck, just like in the front, is referred to as cervical. Usually anything in the back we refer to as dorsal. Right here where shoulder blade region would be is scapular. You must have the R. If you put scapula, then that's, again, referring to the bone. Lumbar. Now, I did tell you anything from the end of the rib cage to your hip is lumbar region, but most often we know it as the lower end of the back, lumbar region. Right in between where your vertebrae would be is vertebral region. Sacral region. If you put sacrum, that would be the bone. Gluteal region, which is the buttock region. And then between the genital regions here and the buttocks is called perineal. Not peroneal, but perennial. The upper part of the leg, again, just like in the front, is femoral. The back of the knee is called popliteal. The calf region is called sural. Again, the side of the lower leg is fibular or peroneal. And that's that. Don't get peroneal confused with perennial. The whole foot, again, is called pedal. And then the heel region is calcaneal. And the sole of the foot, think of planting your foot down onto the floor. It's called plantar. Again, the upper shoulder is acromial. The upper arm is brachial. Now, the back region here where your elbow would be is it's called olecranon. And then the forearm again is antebrachial, just like in the front. The whole hand, remember, is manus. Then you have metacarpal. The thumb again, if I remember correctly, was the hallux. And then the fingers again are digitals. And those are your anatomical regions. And again, all this is for lab. Hopefully it gets re-emphasized with Mr. Torres when you see him on Tuesday. All right, guys, I'm going to stop share on that. And that's pretty much the lecture over chapter 1. You may have to, if you need to, stop it, listen to it again. And next week, I'll hopefully have up for you the lecture over chapter 2. Y'all take care.